It was 8:42 on a Monday morning in Dallas. The skyline shimmered through the glass walls of the executive conference room, but my eyes were locked on the man across from me. Mark Ellison, the VP who had barely spoken to me in months, was leaning back in his chair like he'd already won something. Without a smile, he slid a thick envelope across the polished table. "Your replacement starts Monday," he said flatly. Then, with this smug little pause, "She's coming from Amazon." I didn't say a word. Not because I was stunned, but because in that split second, my mind was already pulling threads. Why would a high-profile Amazon engineer take a mid-level role at a federal defense contractor in Texas? It didn't add up. It reeked of something bigger and much worse than a normal corporate reshuffle. The room felt heavy, like the air had thickened. He watched me, waiting for a reaction. All I gave him was a slow nod, a polite, measured smile. On the outside, I looked calm. Inside, my pulse was pounding, because I knew whatever this was, it was about to spiral way beyond his control. Before I tell you how this all unfolded, where are you listening from? And tell me this, have you ever watched someone think they were untouchable right before everything crashed down on them? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the one that makes someone else feel a little less alone. I left that conference room without a single word to Mark. No protest, no bargaining, just the quiet sound of my heels clicking against the hallway tile. When you've been in the game long enough, you learn silence unsettles people more than shouting ever will. Back at my desk, I didn't linger. Every drawer was emptied in minutes. No framed photos, no potted plants. I'd never been sentimental about the office, but I did take the small black notebook from the bottom drawer. To anyone else, it looked like an ordinary planner. To me, it was 12 years of system diagrams, process notes, and the kind of institutional memory you can't buy. An email went out to the whole company before noon. "Today is my last day. Thank you for the work we've shared. Nothing more. No digs, no parting shots." The trick is to leave people guessing whether you're walking away in defeat or preparing for something else entirely. I grabbed my bag and stepped into the sunlight outside. The heat of a Texas afternoon hit my face. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the heavy air, letting my thoughts settle. Then I pulled out my phone. One number, no name attached. I waited for the click on the other end. "She's in," I said quietly. That was it. 3 words, no explanation needed. I slipped the phone back into my bag and started walking, blending into the midday crowd downtown. There was no point in rushing now. The first move had been made, and the right eyes were already watching. Some people think you have to fight loud to win. They're wrong. Sometimes you just plant the seed and let it grow in the dark. What Mark didn't know, what almost no one in that building knew, was that the ground he was standing on had already started to shift, and by the time he felt it, it would be far too late to move. The following Monday, I walked back into the building, not as an employee, but as a visitor. The laminated badge clipped to my jacket caught the light in a way my old ID never did, like a quiet reminder that I didn't belong here anymore. The security guard glanced up when I signed in. "Back already?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just tying up some loose ends," I replied with a smile. It was technically true. I just didn't specify whose loose ends. Upstairs, the floor buzzed with an unusual energy. People straightened in their chairs when Mark Ellison appeared, guiding a tall woman through the open space. "Everyone, meet our new senior systems engineer," he announced, voice swelling with pride. "She comes to us from Amazon." There was applause, polite but curious. I watched her shake hands, exchanging the kind of smiles you give when you're still measuring a room. But what caught my attention wasn't her charm. It was how quickly she moved past the introductions and straight to an empty workstation. No onboarding, no paperwork at her desk. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as if she'd been here for years. She didn't ask for credentials. She didn't pause to navigate the system menus. She went straight into a back-end dashboard that, in theory, she shouldn't even know existed. Mark hovered over her shoulder, looking pleased, maybe too pleased. It was all happening fast. Faster than anyone seemed to notice except me. And then I saw it, the little red meeting notice pop up on the shared calendar, 2 p.m., Client Briefing, Defense Logistics Division. The clock had started ticking. They just didn't know it yet. The meeting invite sat there on the shared calendar, like a silent warning. 2 p.m., Client Briefing, Defense Logistics Division. That division wasn't just another customer. They were the kind of client who didn't tolerate mistakes, delays, or unknown variables. And right now, there was a very big unknown variable sitting at the new hire's desk. Mark Ellison paced the floor like he was running the show, telling anyone who would listen that today's briefing would impress the hell out of them. He clearly had no idea how fragile the situation really was. Or maybe he did, and he just thought he could control it. From my visitor's seat in the corner, I kept my head down and my ears open. I watched her, the Amazon hire, navigate system after system with uncanny precision. She wasn't exploring, she was executing. Every keystroke had purpose. It was as if she'd rehearsed this exact route through the network. I leaned back slightly, letting the hum of the office fade so I could focus. There was still time, but not much. The briefing was less than 2 hours away, and whatever she was doing, she wanted it done before then. Mark had even expedited her access, bypassing the standard week-long clearance checks, something I'd never seen him do for anyone else. I glanced at the digital clock on the far wall, 13:18. The second hand swept forward relentless. Every minute that passed tightened the knot in my chest. In this line of work, a ticking clock can mean two things: a deadline you're prepared for, or a disaster you can't stop. I wasn't here to stop it. Not yet. And as the minute hand inched closer to 2 o'clock, I realized the moment I'd been waiting for was almost here. At 1:27 p.m., I stood up from the visitor chair and stretched like I was just giving my back a break. No one paid me much attention. A former employee wandering the floor wasn't exactly headline news. That's the beauty of being underestimated. I strolled toward the far side of the office where the internal audit team had their corner. The air felt different there, quieter, more focused, like a library with fluorescent lighting. They were buried in compliance reports, eyes locked on dual monitors, heads barely lifting. As I passed their row, I set my coffee cup down on an empty desk. Next to it, I placed a small matte black USB drive. It looked harmless, almost boring. But it wasn't the kind of device you plugged in without clearance. Around here, it was a signal, one that only a handful of people in this building would recognize. I didn't linger. I kept walking, hands in my pockets, casual enough to blend right back into the flow of the office. In my peripheral vision, I caught it, a quick glance from one of the senior auditors. His gaze shifted from me to the USB, then back to me. No words. Just the faintest nod before he picked it up and slipped it into a drawer. Message received. By the time I made it back to the visitor chair, Mark was still hovering over the Amazon hire, oblivious to the quiet transaction that had just happened 30 feet away. The hum of the air conditioner and the clack of keyboards masked the weight of what was now in motion. I glanced at the clock again. 1:39 p.m. Plenty of time, but not for them. They thought the briefing at 2 was the main event. They had no idea that the real show was about to start, and the opening act was already underway. At 1:45 p.m., the energy in the office shifted. You could feel it before you saw it, a subtle stillness, like the air holding its breath. Then, the elevator doors slid open. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, not the tailored, flashy kind you see in sales. These were plain, precise, and designed to disappear into a government building without attracting attention. Their shoes didn't squeak, their expressions didn't change, and their eyes scanned the room the way a locksmith studies a lock. They walked in sync toward the workstation where the Amazon hire sat. Mark spotted them halfway and straightened up, trying to plaster on that corporate everything's fine smile. It didn't last. One of the suits leaned in and spoke quietly to her. I couldn't hear the words, but the way her fingers froze over the keyboard said enough. The other suit reached for her badge, smooth, no fuss, and clipped it free. Her laptop closed with a soft click, then vanished under his arm. Mark's mouth moved, maybe trying to ask a question, maybe trying to stop them. Neither suit acknowledged him. They turned, guiding her toward the elevators in that calm, unshakable way people do when they know no one is going to get in their path. The office was silent, except for the muted hum of the AC. Every pair of eyes followed them, but no one dared to speak. It wasn't a spectacle, but it was impossible to look away. A quiet kind of power, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice. The elevator doors closed, swallowing them whole. Mark stood there, still holding the phantom weight of control he no longer had. I glanced at the clock. 1:47 p.m. Plenty of time left for the next shoe to drop. The elevator had barely closed behind the suits when the whispers began. It started as a murmur from the far side of the floor, just loud enough to catch the edge of your hearing. By the time it reached my side, the words were clearer and sharper. Federal jurisdiction. Active investigation. Those two phrases passed from desk to desk like static in the air. No one said them at full volume. They didn't have to. In a place like this, those words carry their own weight. Phones started ringing. Not the casual, half-distracted kind of office calls, but short-clipped exchanges. People sat straighter. Screens were minimized when someone walked by. It was the kind of quiet panic you only see when people realize the problem might be bigger than they can manage, and that the wrong move could put their own name in the wrong report. Mark tried to keep his voice even as he spoke to someone on the phone. I caught fragments. Temporary hold. I can explain. Just a misunderstanding. But the strain was there. His free hand was clenched so tight, the skin turned white. I stayed put, my visitor badge still hanging in plain sight. No one asked me why I was here. No one even looked directly at me anymore. They were too busy wondering what kind of trouble had just walked in the door and whether it was leaving anytime soon. Over in the corner, one of the project managers muttered under his breath, "If it's federal, we're screwed." I pretended not to hear. 1:52 p.m. The briefing was minutes away, but the room felt like it was already in freefall. And from where I was sitting, the real drop hadn't even started yet. At exactly 2:05 p.m., it happened. No alarms, no dramatic announcements, just a ripple, small at first, moving across the floor. Emails froze mid-send. Project management dashboards stalled, spinning in endless loading circles. A few people tried refreshing their screens, tapping impatiently at keyboards, but the systems didn't come back. Then the real news hit. The Defense Logistics Division had suspended all work with our company effective immediately. Not just the project for today's briefing, every active contract tied to them was now on hold. Half the room stared at the shared notification that popped up in their inboxes, blinking like they'd just read it in another language. Across the hall, HR appeared, moving with unusual urgency. They carried thick binders and manila folders, collecting paperwork from desks, flipping through forms, asking for signatures without giving much explanation. It didn't take long for the whispers to shift. Now they weren't just saying, "federal investigation." They were saying, "This is going to hit payroll." Mark's voice rose from his corner, sharper now, trying to convince someone, maybe the CEO, maybe himself, that this was just a temporary misunderstanding. But the tone was wrong. It had that tight, brittle edge of someone who knows the floor is slipping under their feet. From my seat, I could see the dominoes starting to fall. When a client like that freezes your contracts, the financial hit isn't a matter of if. It's a matter of how hard. And in this case, it was going to be hard enough to break more than just the budget. I checked the clock again. 2:09 p.m. The numbers on the wall were steady, but in this room, time was running out. And somewhere deep in the building's network, a chain reaction was still unfolding, one that nobody here could stop. Most people in that office thought the freeze was some kind of overreaction, a contractual hiccup, maybe even a clerical error. They couldn't have been more wrong. What they didn't know was that the systems they used every day weren't just designed for efficiency, they were designed for compliance, deep, automated compliance. Every employee's profile, every contractor's credentials, every access request, all of it ran through a silent, always-on scan. The rules were simple but ruthless. If a person flagged on an active federal watch list so much as touched a secure network, the system would lock every connected project in seconds. No questions, no warnings. The priority was containment, not convenience. I knew this because I'd been one of the people who helped write those rules years ago. Back then, it was just another line item in a security upgrade. Today, it was the tripwire Mark Ellison had walked his shiny new hire straight into. From where I sat, I could imagine exactly how it had unfolded. The moment she logged in the system, pinged her profile, cross-checked it, and found the match. The alert didn't come here. It went straight to a secure agency desk somewhere far outside this building. From there, the response was inevitable. People around me still thought they had hours, maybe days, to sort this out. They didn't realize the machine had already moved past them. The investigation wasn't coming. It was already here. I glanced at Mark. He still hadn't made the connection. Not yet. And as much as I wanted to savor that, I knew the next part was going to be even harder for him to swallow. It was 3:12 p.m. when the door to the executive conference room swung open. The CEO himself stepped out, not with his usual slow, calculated stride, but fast, direct, and tight-jawed. Behind him, Mark followed, pale and blinking like someone stepping into sunlight after a long tunnel. They didn't make it far before the CEO stopped in the middle of the open floor. Everyone within earshot froze. The hum of conversation, the tapping of keyboards, gone. Even the copier on the far wall seemed to pause. "You brought a federal target into our systems," the CEO said loud enough for the words to cut through the entire space. His voice wasn't raised in anger. It was the kind of calm that makes people more afraid. "You've compromised our clearance, our contracts, and my name." Mark stammered something about having vetted her, about trusting his sources. The CEO didn't blink. "You didn't vet her. You bypassed protocol, and now we're bleeding millions by the hour." There it was, the figure everyone had been avoiding. Millions, not thousands, not a temporary setback. This was the kind of number that toppled careers. The silence after that was suffocating. No one moved. No one even pretended to keep working. It was a rare thing in corporate life, a reckoning happening right in front of you, with no walls, no closed doors, and no polite language to hide behind. Mark looked around, searching for an ally, but found only lowered eyes. Even the ones who had backed him before now kept their distance. It was over. Everyone knew it. The CEO turned and walked away, leaving Mark standing there, stripped of authority, of confidence, and soon of his job. And as much as this moment seemed like the end for me, it was only the setup for the final move. 2 days later, I was sitting across from my attorney in a quiet corner booth of a hotel cafe. She slid a printed contract across the table and tapped one paragraph with her pen. "This is the one you told me to keep an eye on," she said. I leaned forward. Buried halfway down the page in a block of legal text most people would skim right past was a simple condition. If company revenue dropped by more than 10% within 30 days due to management error, any severance owed to me would be tripled. Tripled. I didn't have to ask where we stood. The defense logistics freeze alone had already knocked out nearly 15%, and that was before the penalties and fines started stacking up. My attorney smiled, the kind of smile you give when you've already done the math. They're going to have to pay out, and they know it. Question is, do you want to wait for them to call, or do you want me to make the call? I sipped my coffee, letting the steam fog the edge of my glasses. "They'll call," I said. "Panic has a way of finding a phone." She chuckled and slid the papers back into her briefcase. Then I'll be ready when they do. By the time I stepped out into the sunlight, my phone was already buzzing. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Not yet. The thing about leverage is it's worth more when the other side knows you have it, but doesn't know exactly how you'll use it. And from the sound of the voicemail that was just starting to play, they were beginning to understand exactly how little control they had left. The payout landed in my account a week later. No drawn-out negotiation, no last-minute arguments. Just a direct deposit with more zeros than most people see in a lifetime. By then, Mark was gone, escorted out quietly, no farewell email, no handshake tour. The Amazon hire vanished just as fast, leaving nothing behind but a trail of unanswered questions. I didn't celebrate with champagne or some big cinematic gesture. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table that night with a glass of water, looking at the city lights through the window. It wasn't victory I felt, it was closure. The kind that comes when you know you didn't just survive something, you navigated it on your terms. A friend asked me later if I ever felt bad about how it all played out. I told them the truth, no, because this wasn't about revenge for me. It was about boundaries, about knowing your worth and protecting it, even if it means walking away in silence until the right moment to speak. The real power wasn't in the clause or the payout, it was in the preparation. In knowing the terrain better than the people who thought they were in control, in staying calm while they underestimated me. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't always have to be the loudest person in the room to win. Sometimes the quietest one is the most dangerous because they're the only ones still thinking. So what about you? Have you ever been underestimated at work and used it to your advantage? I'd like to hear your story in the comments.